name wasn't on the card. Instead, elegant, looping calligraphy spelled out a title I'd never earned Liam's charming +1. The whispers started first, a ripple of amusement from my husband's colleagues at the gala. I looked across the glittering ballroom to the head table, searching for Liam's eyes. My husband, my partner, the man whose career I had helped build from nothing. He was studying his water glass as if it held all the universe's secrets, his silence a confirmation louder than any shout. Have you ever been in a room full of people, next to the one person you trust most, and felt utterly, completely erased? If they've ever acted like you weren't there until your absence echoed louder than presence, share your story. And if this feels like your table too, like and subscribe. My name is Aria, and for the longest time, I believed my greatest skill was understanding the hidden stories within numbers, the secret narratives of profit and loss. I was wrong. My true, untested talent, it turned out, was understanding the silent, creeping arithmetic of betrayal, a calculus I never wanted to learn but was forced to master. It began not with a bang, but with the slow, almost imperceptible erosion of a promise made a decade ago in the hushed cathedral of the Boston University Library, under the warm, golden glow of reading lamps that seemed to incubate dreams as much as illuminate texts. That memory feels like a lifetime ago, a scene from a film starring a younger, more hopeful version of myself. The air in that library had a specific scent, a mixture of aging paper, floor polish, and the electric hum of thousands of young minds running at full capacity. It was a place of immense quiet, but it was never silent. It thrummed with the energy of ambition, a collective yearning for a future that existed just beyond the ivy-covered walls. It was there I met Liam. He sat at the adjacent carrel, a force of restless energy, his leg bouncing and his pen tapping out a frantic rhythm against a thick corporate finance textbook. It was a rhythm that drilled directly into my focus, a persistent, agitating counterpoint to the silent flow of data I was trying to analyze. I remember finally leaning over the partition, my voice a conspiratorial whisper. You know, that rhythm you're tapping is a perfect match for the drum solo in a terrible 80s power ballad. He looked up, and the frantic energy in his eyes was replaced by a sheepish, disarming grin that seemed to light up our small corner of the library. It was a grin that promised both mischief and sincerity, a combination I would later learn to be dangerously charming. That small exchange unspooled into a conversation that lasted until the security guard gently cleared the floor at closing time. We discovered a shared foundation built on instant ramen, massive student loan debt, and a mutual, almost pathological fear of mediocrity. We were two sides of the same coin. Liam possessed a visionary's charisma. He could paint pictures of the future with his words, inspiring belief and excitement in ideas that were still just formless concepts. I, on the other hand, found my comfort in the concrete, in the black and white certainty of a balance sheet. I could see the architecture of a company, its strengths and its fatal flaws. In the patterns of its cash flow, I could deconstruct the beautiful story Liam told and tell you exactly how much it would cost to build, and whether its foundation was solid or sitting on sand. That night, walking across the empty, moonlit campus, we formalized our synergy. Let's make a deal, I said, the words fogging in the crisp Boston air. Whatever happens after this, we're partners, no competition, no jealousy. We lift each other up, always. Liam took my hand, his grip firm and warm, and shook it with a mock seriousness. Partners in ambition, he declared, for life. That promise became the bedrock of our early years. It was the driving force behind the all-nighter I pulled when he landed his first major interview, a junior analyst position at a rapidly growing tech firm called Ascendia Dynamics. Our tiny apartment, with its mismatched furniture and view of a brick wall, transformed into a strategic command center. I dove into Ascendia's public filings, their quarterly reports, their competitors' market shares. I built financial models and drafted SWOT analyses, translating the dense corporate jargon into clear, actionable talking points for him. I didn't just help him prepare, I armed him. I drilled him for hours, playing the role of a skeptical board member, a ruthless interviewer, a curious investor, until he could articulate Ascendia's 5-year plan more cogently than the CEO who had written it. The night before his interview, as he stood in front of our cracked bathroom mirror, adjusting a tie I'd bought him from a thrift store, I felt a surge of pride so fierce it was almost painful. You're going to walk in there and rebuild their entire strategy from the ground up, I told his reflection. They would be insane not to hire you. He got the job. Our celebration was a $3 bottle of champagne, its bubbles tasting like pure, unadulterated victory in our chipped coffee mugs. When you land your first big consulting client, he promised, his eyes bright with shared triumph, we are upgrading to champagne that requires a real corkscrew. That promise, like the one in the library, felt unbreakable. It was a testament to our shared future, a future we were building together. Brick by painstaking brick, we were a team, a perfect partnership moving in absolute lockstep. It was us against the world, and for a beautiful, fleeting period, it felt like we were winning. Now, 10 years later, I sit in the sterile quiet of my home office, an office that overlooks the glittering Boston skyline from the 27th floor. The silence in this apartment is different from the library's hum. It is a heavy, empty silence, the sound of a space that has been hollowed out from the inside. The man I share this space with is no longer the restless, energetic student with a sheepish grin. He is Liam, executive director at Ascendia Dynamics, a man polished by success, his ambition now encased in a cool, impenetrable armor. The use against the world feeling has been replaced by something else, a subtle but persistent feeling of him and Ascendia against me. The shift had been gradual, a slow continental drift I barely noticed until the chasm was already miles wide. It began and ended with one person, Victoria Vance. Victoria had been brought in as the new COO a little over a year ago, a celebrated corporate shark known for her aggressive turnaround strategies. Almost overnight, her name became a constant presence in our home, a third party in our marriage. Liam spoke of her with a kind of breathless reverence, quoting her visionary insights and ruthless efficiency as if they were scripture. Victoria has this incredible ability to cut through the noise, he would say, his eyes distant, already back in the boardroom. She doesn't waste time on sentiment, she sees the goal and executes. At first, I tried to embrace it, to see this woman as the incredible mentor my husband claimed she was. I suggested we invite her for dinner, wanting to connect with the person who was so profoundly shaping the man I loved. Liam was always quick to deflect. Her schedule was too demanding, her time too valuable for mere social gatherings. He was, I now realize, protecting her world from me and my world from her. The meeting, when it finally happened, was not over a dinner table but by chance, at a minimalist coffee shop in Back Bay that smelled of burnt espresso and ambition. Liam had been delayed, and I was waiting alone when she walked in. I recognized her instantly from the profiles in business journals. Victoria Vance was tall and impeccably dressed in a severe charcoal suit, her presence sucking the air out of the room. She moved with a predatory stillness, her eyes scanning the space with quick, calculating glances. When Liam arrived and introduced us, her handshake was firm and cool, her smile a brief, practiced flash of white. Liam, beaming, explained my work. Aria runs her own financial consulting practice, right from home. She's brilliant. Victoria's gaze flickered over me, a rapid, dismissive appraisal from my shoes to my hair. "Oh, how admirable," she said, her voice smooth as silk but with an underlying edge of condescension. "It's wonderful that you find the time to keep yourself occupied with your personal projects." The words were chosen with surgical precision. Personal projects. She had reduced my career, my expertise, my entire professional identity into a hobby, a quaint little pastime a wife indulges in while her husband does the real work. A flush of heat crept up my neck, but I held her gaze and smiled, a tight, polite smile that felt like a mask. In that single, fleeting moment, I was no longer a partner in ambition, I was an amusing little footnote in her employee's life story. The drive home was thick with a silence that felt heavier than usual. I finally broke it, testing the waters. She's very direct. Liam, who was scrolling through work emails on his phone, didn't look up. "That's why she's the best," he said, his tone casual, almost bored. "Victoria doesn't do passive aggression. She's transparent. You always know where you stand with her." I wanted to scream that I knew exactly where I stood with her somewhere beneath her notice. I wanted to ask him if he didn't hear the blatant disrespect, the carefully crafted insult wrapped in a seemingly pleasant package. But I saw the closed-off expression on his face, the subtle defensiveness in his posture. He had already chosen his side. He wasn't just working for Victoria Vance, he was her disciple. To question her was to question his judgment, his ambition, his entire trajectory. That was the moment I felt the first true crack in our foundation. It wasn't a loud, shattering break, but a hairline fracture, silent and deep. The promise we had made in the library, the vow to lift each other up, had been unilaterally amended. A new clause had been added, one I hadn't agreed to. All ambitions were to be validated and approved by Victoria Vance. My own were now just quaint, personal projects. I was no longer a partner, I was an accessory, and a slightly inconvenient one at that. The weeks following that encounter at the coffee shop were steeped in a strange, unsettling quiet. The fault line that had cracked open in our marriage remained, a silent chasm we both tacitly agreed not to acknowledge. Liam buried himself in his work, his evenings consumed by late-night calls and strategy documents shrouded in the impenetrable jargon of Victoria's aggressive corporate philosophy. I, in turn, retreated into the orderly world of my own consulting work, finding solace in the predictable logic of financial statements, a world where every number had a reason and every action had a clear and traceable consequence. Our communication became a series of logistical exchanges about groceries and dry cleaning, a carefully choreographed dance around the gaping hole in the center of our life together. The easy camaraderie of our past was a ghost that haunted the clean, minimalist lines of our expensive apartment. Then, about a month before the company's annual gala, something shifted. Liam emerged from his corporate cocoon with a sudden, almost jarring attentiveness. He started coming home earlier, leaving his work laptop closed on the hall console table. He'd bring me a glass of wine as I finalized reports in my office, rubbing my shoulders and asking about my day with a focused interest I hadn't seen in years. It was a flawless imitation of the man I'd married, but it felt like a performance, a well-rehearsed play designed to lull me into a state of comfortable nostalgia. My internal alarms, honed by years of analyzing deceptive corporate behavior, were sounding a low, persistent hum. This wasn't a repair, it was a renovation, a strategic remodel of our relationship for an unknown purpose. The purpose revealed itself on a Tuesday evening. "The Ascendia Dynamics Gala is next month," he announced, his tone bright and casual as he handed me a glass of Chardonnay. "And I really want you to come with me this year. It's important to me that you're there." He spoke of the event with a manufactured reverence, describing it as the pinnacle of the corporate calendar, a place where futures were made and alliances were cemented. He insisted it was time for me to truly see the world he now inhabited, to understand the scale of what he was helping to build under Victoria's brilliant leadership. Every word felt polished and purposeful, part of a larger, unseen agenda. A few nights later, as I was browse online for a suitable dress, he approached me in the soft light of my office. He leaned against the doorframe, watching me for a moment before speaking, his voice carefully modulated. "You know, darling," he began, a term of endearment he hadn't used in months. "I've been thinking about the gala. It's going to be a night for celebration, for building relationships. It's not really a work event in that sense." I kept my eyes on the screen, a parade of silk and satin dresses scrolling past. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice neutral. He walked over, placing his hands on my shoulders. "Your work is incredible, Arya. You know, I think that. It's just, it can be very complex, very intense. Frankly, not everyone can keep up, and I wouldn't want them to misunderstand your brilliance for being aggressive." There it was, the velvet-gloved insult, delivered as an act of protection. "Tonight," he continued, his voice dropping to a persuasive murmur, "I just want everyone to see the amazing, supportive, brilliant woman I'm married to, not the financial analyst, just you. Let's leave the shop talk at home just for one night. Let's let them see us as a team." The request was a masterpiece of condescension, a strategic maneuver to silence me, to neatly package me into the role of the smiling, supportive wife. He was asking me to check my intellect at the door, to voluntarily diminish myself to make his colleagues more comfortable. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, but on the surface, I simply nodded. "Of course, Liam," I said. "Whatever you think is best." My agreement was my armor. If I was to be a silent accessory, I would be the most elegant, composed, and observant accessory in the room. The night of the gala arrived, cloaked in an atmosphere of performative opulence. The ballroom of the Copley Plaza was a breathtaking spectacle of crystal chandeliers, cascading floral arrangements, and the low murmuring tide of expensive chatter. I wore a deep emerald green gown, a column of silk that felt both elegant and formidable, my hair styled in a severe, polished chignon. As I walked in on Liam's arm, I felt like a general preparing for a state dinner in enemy territory, my senses on high alert, analyzing the power dynamics in every handshake, the hidden meanings in every polite smile. Liam was in his element, navigating the crowd with an easy confidence. His hand on the small of my back, a proprietary gesture that felt more like a brand than a caress. The first strategic separation occurred almost immediately. As we approached the main receiving line, a young assistant with a clipboard and an unnervingly bright smile intercepted us. "Mr. Hamilton," she chirped at Liam. "Miss, Vance has your seat waiting for you at the leadership table." "Of course, and we have a lovely spot for you. Aria, right over here." She gestured vaguely towards the center of the vast room. Liam didn't miss a beat. He gave my hand a brief squeeze, his eyes already scanning the room for Victoria. "I'll see you in a bit," he said, before being swept away into the inner circle of power, leaving me in the capable hands of the smiling assistant. I was escorted through a maze of elegantly set tables, the names on the place cards a roll call of Ascendia's corporate hierarchy. My table was well appointed but strategically placed, a satellite island of mid-level managers and their spouses. I exchanged pleasantries, the names and faces a blur of polite indifference. It wasn't until I went to take my seat that I saw it. The place card was made of the same heavy, cream-colored cardstock as all the others, my name written in the same elegant, looping calligraphy. Except it wasn't my name, where Aria Hamilton should have been. A different title was inscribed with perfect, calligraphic precision, Liam's charming +1. The words seemed to hover above the card for a moment, refusing to resolve into meaning. I read them again. For a woman who reads balance sheets for a living, the brutal math of this equation was simple. I was not an asset. I was a footnote, a rounding error. This was not a mistake. It was a message, a deliberate, calculated act of erasure. A faint chuckle from a woman across the table broke the spell, a sound quickly stifled behind a perfectly manicured hand. Her eyes met mine for a split second, a flicker of pity mixed with morbid amusement, before she looked away. Then another guest leaned over to whisper to his neighbor, and a ripple of quiet. Knowing laughter spread around the table. They had all seen it. They were all in on the joke. The joke was me. My blood ran cold. I scanned the room, my gaze cutting through the glittering crowd until it found the head table. I saw Victoria, radiant in a silver gown, laughing at something the CEO, Mr. Chen, had said. And I saw Liam, seated beside her. He was not looking at me. He was staring intently at his water glass, turning it slowly in his hand, his posture a rigid tableau of feigned nonchalance. He knew. He had to have known. His utter, profound silence was his confession. It was his complicity, his signature on my public humiliation. The man who had once promised to be my partner, to lift me up, was now sitting idly by, a willing spectator to my character assassination, orchestrated by the woman he so admired. A strange, icy calm descended over me. The hurt was there, a deep, tectonic shift beneath the surface, but on top of it was a layer of pure, unadulterated clarity. The woman they thought they were mocking, the charming, silent +1, was a fiction. The real Aria, the analyst, the architect of strategies, was watching, calculating, and processing this new, damning data. I stood up, my movements fluid and deliberate. I pushed my chair in silently, my emerald dress whispering against the fine linen of the tablecloth. Every eye at the table followed me, their amusement now mixed with a confused uncertainty. I ignored them. My focus was singular. With my head held high, I began to walk, not toward the exit, but directly toward the head table. The world seemed to narrow to the path in front of me. I noticed the intricate, swirling pattern on the deep blue carpet, a detail my mind latched onto with detached precision. The journey felt like miles, a slow, purposeful procession across a battlefield. I saw Liam's head finally snap up, his eyes wide with a flicker of panic as he saw me approaching. He made a move as if to stand, but I gave him a look so devoid of emotion, so utterly cold, that he froze in his seat. I did not stop at his chair. I continued on, my path taking me directly behind the company's CEO, Mr. Chen, a stern, older man with a reputation for integrity and a deep understanding of corporate warfare. As I passed, I leaned in close, my lips almost brushing his ear, my voice a low, steady whisper that was for him and him alone. Mr. Chen, I murmured. My tone as cool and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. Victoria Vance is a bigger liability to Ascendia's stock price than you can imagine. Check her Q3 revenue deferrals. I didn't wait for a response. I straightened up and continued my walk toward the grand ballroom doors, never once looking back. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room on me, but their stares no longer mattered. In the space of 30 seconds, I had gone from being the butt of a cruel joke to being the most dangerous person in the room. The charming plus one had just armed the king for a corporate coup, and her name was Arya. The heavy glass doors of the Copley Plaza slid shut behind me, muting the symphony of clinking glasses and forced laughter to a dull, distant thrum. The cool night air of Boston hit me like a physical slap, a welcome shock to my system that solidified the icy resolve forming in my veins. I didn't look for a taxi. I walked, my emerald gown sweeping across the pavement, my mind a whirlwind of cold, clear calculation. Each step was a deliberate move away from the woman they had tried to create in that ballroom, the charming, silent accessory, and a step toward the woman I had allowed to lie dormant for far too long. The hurt was a low, burning ember deep inside, but it was being rapidly consumed by a much hotter, more powerful fire, the thrill of the hunt. By the time I arrived back at our apartment, the adrenaline had sharpened into a singular, unwavering focus. Liam was not home, and a profound sense of relief washed over me at the sight of the empty space. His presence would have been a distraction, an emotional complication to a problem that had now become purely mathematical. I walked straight past our bedroom, past the life we had curated together, and went to my home office. A thin layer of dust coated the secondary monitor and the specialized financial keyboard I hadn't used in months, a silent testament to the parts of myself I had deprioritized. With a deliberate, almost ceremonial gesture, I wiped the dust away with the sleeve of my expensive gown. My war room was now open for business. The first 24 hours were an exercise in disciplined, methodical archaeology. I didn't search for a single, obvious piece of fraud. That was an amateur's mistake. Instead, I began to rebuild the entire financial history of Ascendia Dynamics from the moment Victoria Vance had taken her seat as COO. It was a tedious, painstaking process of downloading years of public SEC filings, 10Ks, 10Qs, 8Ks, and arranging them chronologically. Fueled by black coffee that soon turned stale on my desk, I watched the hours on the clock melt away, the ache in my lower back a dull companion to the burning in my eyes. The city outside my window went from glittering to dark to dawn, and I barely noticed. At first, I found nothing overtly illegal. Victoria was too smart for that. What I found was a pattern of aggressive, boundary-pushing accounting that danced right on the edge of regulatory compliance. Revenue was recognized the microsecond a contract was signed. Expenses were deferred and amortized over impossibly long timelines. And goodwill from previous acquisitions was used as a flexible, all-purpose cushion to smooth out any quarterly earnings that fell short of Wall Street's expectations. It was the work of a supremely confident artist who knew exactly how much stress the canvas could take before it tore. It was arrogant, but it was defensible. It wasn't the smoking gun I needed. The breakthrough came on the second day, deep into the night when the numbers on the screen began to blur into abstract patterns. I decided to shift my focus from Ascendia's internal performance to its acquisition strategy. Under Victoria, the company had acquired 7 smaller tech startups in less than 18 months, publicly. They were framed as synergistic purchases to bolster Ascendia's innovation pipeline. As I dug deeper, a disturbing pattern began to resolve from the blur. Each target company was struggling, cash poor but rich in one specific area, nascent, promising intellectual property. Ascendia would acquire them for a fraction of their potential value. Then, within 2 or 3 quarters, the key research and development projects from these acquired companies would be publicly written off as failures. resulting in a significant tax benefit for Ascendia. But the technology didn't just disappear. That's when the thrill of the hunt truly returned, a familiar jolt of adrenaline that cut through my exhaustion. I started cross-referencing patent filings and technical specifications. The failed projects were being subtly reborn, their core components and algorithms integrated into Ascendia's own flagship products, now reclassified as successful internal R&D. It was a brilliant and predatory scheme: buy innovation for pennies on the dollar, declare it a failure for the tax write-off, and then absorb the valuable IP without ever having to properly value it on the books. It was a sophisticated manipulation of value, designed to mislead investors about the true source and cost of the company's innovation. A cold smile touched my lips for the first time in days. This was Victoria's signature. I had found her narrative, the hidden story she had written between the lines of her public filings. But a pattern, however damning, was still just a theory. I had the what, but I needed the how and the why. I needed proof of intent, and that was something I could not find in the public domain. I needed a voice from inside the machine. My mind raced through the hierarchy of Ascendia dynamics, but I knew no one in the finance department well enough to trust. To ask the wrong person would be to tip my hand and risk everything. Frustrated, I pulled up the company's internal directory on a public professional networking site, my eyes scanning the names in the accounting division. Most were senior people, loyalists who had been promoted by Victoria herself. Then my eyes landed on a name near the bottom of the list: Ben Carter, junior accountant. The name was vaguely familiar, and I dug back into my memory, pushing past the fog of the last few years. And then it came to me, a clear, sharp image from 4 or 5 years ago, a university job fair, a nervous, bright-eyed student who had approached my consulting booth, asking incisive questions that stood out from the usual undergraduate prattle. I remembered our conversation. He had been torn between a safe job at a big accounting firm and a more dynamic role in corporate tech. I had looked at his resume and then at him, and given him one piece of advice: the big firms teach you the rules so you can enforce them. I'd told him, corporate teaches you the rules so you can bend them. If you choose corporate, just remember this: a company's story is never in the headlines. It's in the footnotes, especially the pro forma reconciliations. That's where they bury the truth. He had written it down, a look of genuine understanding in his eyes. He had taken the job at Ascendia. He was my long shot, my only shot. Risking direct contact was out of the question. I spent the next hour setting up a new, completely anonymous identity. I used a privacy-focused browser to sign up for an encrypted email service based in Switzerland, creating a username that had no connection to me: Veritas 729. My hands moved with a swift, forgotten efficiency. This was my world, the world of careful strategy and calculated risk. I composed a short, sterile message. There was no greeting, no explanation. It contained only the sentence I had spoken to him years ago: a digital key to a locked memory. A company's story is never in the headlines. It's in the footnotes, especially the pro forma reconciliations. That's where they bury the truth, below it. I added a single leading question: what is the standard amortization schedule for intangible assets acquired from non-performing entities at Ascendia? I hit send, and the message disappeared into the void. The waiting was the hardest part. For a full day, there was nothing. I wrestled with a gnawing doubt. Had I misjudged him? Was he too scared? Or worse, had he become one of them, loyal to the system that paid his salary? Had I just foolishly exposed my hand and put a young man in an impossible position? The thought that I might have endangered him for the sake of my own vindication was a bitter pill to swallow. I continued my research, but my focus was fractured, my eyes constantly flicking back to the empty inbox of Veritas 729. I was about to give up, to assume my gamble had failed, when the notification finally appeared: a new email. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened it with a trembling hand, like my message to him. It was stark and anonymous. There was no text in the body of the email at all. There was only a single attachment: a password-protected, encrypted zip file. A second email arrived moments later from the same anonymous sender, containing only a 17-character alphanumeric password. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I downloaded the file and entered the password. The file unzipped, revealing a small trove of documents that made the air leave my lungs with a rush. There were internal email chains, conversations between Victoria Vance and the head of accounting, discussing the need to aggressively recognize the synergies from recent acquisitions. There were draft spreadsheets showing the initial, higher valuations of the acquired tech assets before they were systematically written down post-acquisition. And then there was the smoking gun, a memo, authored by Victoria herself, outlining the strategy for optimizing the tax burden by accelerating the depreciation of acquired assets while simultaneously initiating internal innovation projects that mirrored the failed technology. It was all there, the intent, the methodology, the cover-up. It was the cold, hard proof my theory needed, the final variable that solved the entire, ugly equation. The ghost in the machine had just spoken, and it had handed me a confession. The file from Ben Carter sat on my encrypted drive, a compact bundle of digital dynamite. For a moment, staring at the neatly organized evidence of Victoria's corruption, I felt a dizzying surge of pure vindictive triumph. It was the feeling of a hunter cornering her prey, a moment of absolute power. But the feeling was fleeting, quickly replaced by the cold, heavy weight of responsibility. This was no longer just about a personal humiliation at a gala. It had grown far beyond that. The data I possessed could shatter careers, destabilize a publicly traded company, and impact the lives of thousands of employees and investors. A reckless move, an emotional leak, would be a betrayal of the very professional ethos I was trying to reclaim. My revenge, I decided, had to be as precise, methodical, and dispassionate as the analysis that had led me here. An anonymous post on a chaotic investor forum would be a firecracker, loud and messy. I needed a surgical strike. My mind immediately went to one named Julian Croft. Croft was a lone wolf in the financial journalism world, a former investigative reporter who now ran a highly influential, independent blog called The Bloodhound's Ledger. He had a well-earned reputation for sniffing out corporate rot months, sometimes years, before the mainstream financial press. His analyses were famously meticulous, his sourcing impeccable, and his integrity was beyond reproach. To have my findings published on his blog would not create a panic. It would create a serious, considered crisis of confidence among the people who truly mattered, the institutional investors, the market makers, and the regulators. I spent the next 48 hours transforming the raw data into an unassailable dossier. This was a battle fought within myself as much as on the screen. There was a primal part of me that wanted to write with fire, to infuse every sentence with the poison of my own betrayal, to expose Liam and Victoria as the monsters they were. But I suppressed that voice with iron-willed discipline. I forced myself to become a neutral third-party analyst, a disembodied expert presenting a case study in corporate malfeasance. The wronged wife had to leave the room so the professional could work. With that clarity, I created charts that visualized the cold correlation between Ascendia's acquisitions and its subsequent R&D write-offs. I wrote a dispassionate, academic-style analysis of the accounting treatments, citing the specific GAAP principles Victoria's team had violated. I annotated the leaked emails, not with commentary, but with simple arrows and highlights, allowing the damning words to speak for themselves. I was connecting the dots with the cold, irrefutable logic of a prosecutor's closing argument. Finally, I compiled everything into a single, password-protected PDF. I titled it simply, Cracks in Ascendia's Foundation, an Independent Analysis of Asset Valuation and IP Transfer. Using my Veritas 729 identity, I uploaded the file to Julian Croft's secure submission portal. My message to him was as sterile as the report itself. It read, Mr. Croft, enclosed is an analysis of concerning financial patterns at Ascendia Dynamics. The source documents are from within the company. I believe this warrants the attention of your readers. I will not be making further contact. I hit send, severing the final tie. The weapon was fired. All I could do now was watch for the impact. The following days were an exercise in supreme patience. I set up alerts on my terminal for Ascendia's stock ticker and scoured financial news sites and private trading forums. For 2 days, there was nothing but the usual market chatter. A part of me began to fear that Croft had dismissed the dossier as the work of a crank, or that his own investigation had hit a dead end. Then, on a Wednesday morning just before the market opened, it happened. The Bloodhound's Ledger had a new post. The title was the one I had written, Cracks in Ascendia's Foundation. My breath caught in my chest. Croft hadn't just published my analysis, he had adopted it, expanded upon it with his own corroborating research, and presented it with his signature, authoritative voice. He called the patterns deeply troubling and questioned the board's oversight. The post spread through the professional financial community like a contagion. On my screen, I watched the real-time market data for Ascendia stock. At the 9:30 a.m. opening bell, a wave of sell orders appeared, not from panicked retail investors, but from major trading houses. The stock, which had closed at $158 the previous day, opened at $155 and began a steady, relentless slide. It wasn't a crash, not yet. It was a tremor, a calculated professional loss of confidence. By noon, the stock was down 5%. The first domino had fallen. The reaction from Ascendia was swift, and it was pure Victoria Vance. I imagined the emergency meetings, the frantic calls, the carefully managed chaos within their glass tower headquarters. I pictured Liam, my husband, at the heart of it. His loyalty now fully and irrevocably chained to the woman who had orchestrated my humiliation and his company's deception. Late that afternoon, an official press release hit the news wires. It was a masterclass in corporate deflection. The company acknowledged recent market volatility driven by unfounded rumors on a non-reputable blog, a clear attempt to discredit Croft. The statement went on to blame the appearance of accounting discrepancies on a recently discovered legacy system integration error following a previous acquisition. To add a layer of credibility to their lie, they announced the immediate termination of their senior VP of IT, a man named Marcus Thorne. Out of a grim curiosity, I looked him up. His professional profile picture showed a kind-faced man with laugh lines around his eyes, wearing a t-shirt from a local youth soccer league he apparently coached. He was a 20-year veteran of the company, a family man, a fixture in his community. He was now a scapegoat, a human sacrifice offered up to appease the angry gods of the market. It was a move of such breathtaking cynicism that it left me momentarily speechless. This wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was about the casual destruction of human lives to protect a lie. Victoria wasn't just a cheat, she was a predator. But the centerpiece of their counteroffensive was yet to come. The next morning, Ascendia's communications team announced that Liam would be appearing on a major financial news network for a live interview to address the concerns of our investors and restore confidence. I felt a cold dread mix with a grim fascination. I made a fresh pot of coffee and sat before my largest monitor, waiting for the broadcast to begin. When he appeared on screen, he looked impeccable in a dark suit, his expression a carefully calibrated mask of calm authority. But I, who had studied his face for a decade, could see the tells. I saw the faint tension in his jaw, the almost imperceptible flare of his nostrils as he took a breath, the way he clasped his hands just a little too tightly on the desk in front of him. He was terrified, but he was hiding it well. The interviewer asked him directly about the allegations in Croft's blog post. Liam smiled, a smooth, reassuring smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We have the utmost respect for all market analysis," he began, his voice even and steady. "But in this case, the conclusions drawn from a limited set of data are simply incorrect. What the blog identified was, as we've stated, the result of a complex systems integration issue." As he spoke, he used a specific turn of phrase, robust internal controls, a phrase I had drilled into him all those years ago before his first interview. Hearing my own words being twisted into a weapon for his lie felt like a fresh betrayal. "We've isolated the problem," he continued, looking directly into the camera. "We've made the necessary personnel changes to ensure accountability, and we are already implementing more robust internal controls." Every word was a lie, polished and delivered with the conviction of a true believer. He wasn't just repeating a script, he was selling it with the full force of his charisma. As I listened to my husband calmly and eloquently lie to the entire financial world, the last vestiges of the man I had once loved evaporated. The man on the screen was a stranger, a hollowed-out vessel for Victoria Vance's ambition. He was not just complicit in my humiliation, he was now an active agent in a grand deception, the public face of the lie. The interview concluded with Liam announcing that Ascendia, in the spirit of full transparency, would be releasing an adjusted financial summary to correct the system-related errors. The document was released an hour later. I downloaded it, my hands steady, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. It was another work of art. The numbers had been shuffled, the categories renamed, the questionable deferrals now reclassified under a new opaque heading of strategic platform investments. It was designed to confuse, to muddy the waters just enough to make the original allegations seem like a misunderstanding. They hadn't fixed the problem, they had simply built a more sophisticated cage of lies around it. They believed they had contained the tremor. They had no idea I was about to trigger an earthquake. The adjusted financial summary Liam had presented to the world was, in its own way, a work of genius. It was a labyrinth of convoluted footnotes and reclassified assets, designed not to clarify, but to exhaust and confuse anyone who tried to follow the trail. But to me, it was something else entirely. It was a signed confession. It was proof of a deliberate, high-level cover-up, a second layer of fraud built upon the first. The tremor I had caused was not enough to bring the building down. They had simply plastered over the cracks. I realized then that my next move could not be a subtle hint or an anonymous whisper. It had to be the final, undeniable detonation. I spent that night in the cold, blue glow of my monitors, not as an archaeologist searching for clues, but as a chief prosecutor preparing her final, irrefutable case. My target was no longer just Victoria's scheme. It was the entire institution of lies she had built around it, an institution my own husband was now publicly defending. I meticulously documented every discrepancy between their official, adjusted report and the raw data Ben Carter had provided. I created a side-by-side comparison that showed not just the original sin, but the subsequent cover-up, highlighting how they had used the scapegoating of Marcus Thorne as a smokescreen for their deeper deception. Just as I was finalizing my report, a new encrypted email from Ben arrived. There was no text, only another attachment. It was a single, forwarded internal memo from Victoria's office. The subject line read, "Narrative alignment and personnel restructuring." My blood ran cold as I read its contents. It was a cold-blooded, explicit directive from Victoria to the head of HR, outlining the regrettable but necessary decision to terminate Marcus Thorne. Citing performance issues that her own team had fabricated, she was creating a false paper trail to justify destroying a man's career. This memo was the point of no return. It elevated the crime from financial fraud to malicious, premeditated destruction. I added it to my dossier, the final brutal piece of evidence. This time, the file cover was stark white, the title stripped of all metaphor. It read, "An Inquiry into Material Misrepresentations and Fiduciary Duty Failures at Ascendia Dynamics." It sounded official because it was. It was the truth, codified. My strategy would be a two-pronged attack. The first package, printed and bound, was sent via bonded legal courier to CEO Jonathan Chen's office, marked strictly personal and confidential. This was his chance to lead. The second, a digital copy, was sent from Veritas 729 to the secure inbox of Camila Reyes, the most tenacious investigative reporter at the Boston Globe. This was my guarantee that the truth would have its day, with or without Mr. Chen's blessing. After sending both packages, a strange sense of calm settled over me. There was no anxiety, no nervous anticipation. I had assembled the facts, built the mechanism, and pushed the button. I was no longer an active participant, but an observer. I felt like a force of nature, like a geologist who, having predicted an earthquake, now simply waits for the seismograph to confirm what she already knows to be an immutable truth. The explosion came faster and louder than I could have imagined. At 2:17 p.m. the following day, a banner headline appeared on the Boston Globe's homepage, "Ascendia Dynamics CEO and COO implicated in fraud and cover-up scandal, federal probe expected." Camila Reyes had not only verified my information, but had clearly gotten an internal source, perhaps Mr. Chen himself, to confirm its authenticity. The article was a brutal, systematic takedown. Within minutes, the stock exchanges halted trading on Ascendia's stock. The tremor had become an earthquake. The building was coming down. I sat in my office, watching the news alerts cascade across my screen. Statements from law firms announcing class action lawsuits, pundits on financial networks expressing their shock and dismay. A brief, terse announcement from Ascendia's board that they were aware of the allegations and were launching a full, independent investigation. It was all happening exactly as I had foreseen. I felt no joy, no thrill of victory. All I felt was a profound, hollow sense of finality. I had set the world on fire, and now I was simply a spectator to the blaze. I heard the key turn in our front door just after 5 o'clock. The sound was different from usual, hesitant, fumbling. The heavy thud of Liam's briefcase dropping by the entrance echoed through the silent apartment. His footsteps were not the confident stride of an executive, but the slow, heavy shuffle of a defeated man. Arya. His voice was a raw, broken thing, a sound I hadn't heard in a decade. In my office, I called back, my own voice steady and calm. I didn't turn from my monitor, where a live news report was showing helicopters circling the Ascendia Dynamics headquarters. He appeared in the doorway, a ghost in an expensive suit. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it for hours. His Tom Ford tie was loosened, his face ashen, and his eyes, when they met mine, were wide with a desperation that bordered on terror. He didn't speak at first, just sank into the leather chair opposite my desk, his body deflating as if his very skeleton was exhausted. "It's a catastrophe," he finally whispered, rubbing his face with both hands. "The FBI is there. They're seizing servers, documents. Victoria has been placed on administrative leave. They're saying there could be criminal charges." He looked at me then, his eyes pleading, searching for the woman he had long taken for granted, the partner he only remembered he needed when his world was on fire. "Arya." He leaned forward, his voice cracking. "I need you. I'm implicated in this. I was the one on television. I was the one signing off on the strategy decks. I need your mind. You're the only one who can see a way through this, who can analyze the documents and find a path. We're a team. Remember, partners for life. Please, help me." The silence that followed stretched for an eternity. I let his words hang in the air, let him feel the full weight of their bitter, tragic irony. I slowly turned my chair to face him, my expression unreadable. "The partner I knew," I began, my voice quiet but cutting through the silence like a shard of glass, "would have defended me at that gala. He would have never allowed my name to be erased. The man sitting in that chair chose a title over his wife." I paused, letting the truth of that statement settle over him. "The analyst you need right now is the woman you spent the last year pretending didn't exist." A flicker of confusion crossed his face, the first crack in his desperate focus. What are you talking about, the gala? This is bigger than that." "No," I said, my voice remaining level, cold. "It's all part of the same story, a story about what happens when you underestimate people." I watched his face closely, saw the gears in his mind turning, struggling to connect dots he had refused to see for so long. The blog post, the reporter, the precision of the attack. His eyes widened, a dawning horror filling them. "That blog, the reporter, the documents," he stammered, his voice barely audible. "Oh God, Arya, no, it wasn't you, was it?" I gave him no verbal confirmation. I simply held his gaze, in my silence. He saw the answer, and his entire composure shattered. It was not a quiet breakdown. It was a complete visceral unraveling. The color drained from his face, and he seemed to shrink in his chair, the expensive suit suddenly looking 2 sizes too big. "But why?" he whispered, his voice filled with a child's disbelief. I, we, this was our life, our future. You and Victoria made one critical, arrogant error," I said, standing up from my desk for the first time. "You put me in a box labeled wife, and in doing so, you forgot what I do for a living." I walked to the window, looking down at the city lights beginning to twinkle on, a world that seemed entirely indifferent to the personal apocalypse unfolding in this room. "You didn't need a charming plus one. Liam, you needed a partner who could have warned you that your brilliant mentor was a reckless fraud. You had one. Your fatal mistake was that you didn't value your own assets." He was speechless, his mouth slightly agape, staring at me as if seeing me for the very first time. The mirror had shattered, and for the first time, he was seeing the ugly, undeniable truth of the choices he had made. I did not see Liam again after that night. He left the apartment the next morning before I awoke, his absence a quiet admission of defeat. A few days later, a moving company arrived to quietly remove his belongings. I watched them carry away the expensive furniture, the designer clothes, the artifacts of a life we had built on a flawed prospectus. Each item they removed seemed to lighten the air in the room, replacing an oppressive, curated silence with a clean, expansive quiet that invited thought and promised peace. I didn't stay in that apartment. That sterile glass box in the sky filled with the ghosts of broken promises. Selling it was the first official act of my new independence. I found a smaller, warmer space in a historic brownstone in the South End, a place with aged hardwood floors that creaked with character and tall windows that bathed the rooms in gentle morning light. It was a space that felt like it belonged to me and me alone. The fire I had started raged on in the world outside, but within the walls of my new life, there was only a profound and welcome calm. I did not follow the day-to-day spectacle of Ascendia's collapse with the obsessive focus of before. My work was done, but the consequences, like ripples from a great stone dropped in a pond, eventually found their way to my shore. 6 months later, the major legal proceedings had concluded. One morning, while sipping coffee and reading a financial journal, I saw her picture. Victoria Vance was leaving the federal courthouse. The woman in the photograph was a stranger. The impeccably tailored power suits were gone, replaced by a plain, ill-fitting blazer. The arrogant, predatory confidence had evaporated, leaving behind a weary, hollowed-out resignation. Her shoulders were slumped, her gaze fixed on the pavement. A queen dethroned, utterly defeated by her own hubris. The article detailed the terms of her plea bargain: a lifetime ban from serving as an officer or director of any public company, substantial financial penalties that would cripple her wealth, and a period of house arrest. Her career was not just over, it had been permanently erased from the ledger of corporate America. I felt no surge of triumph, no satisfying taste of revenge. I felt only the quiet, dispassionate closure of closing a long, exhausting case file. She was a liability that had finally been written off the books. Liam's fate was less dramatic, but in some ways, more poignant. A former colleague mentioned seeing his updated professional profile online. My curiosity, for a brief, clinical moment, got the better of me. The proud title of Executive Director at Ascendia Dynamics was gone, replaced by Regional Sales Associate at a small, unremarkable software distribution company. The picture was new. The confident, charismatic man from the television interview had been replaced by someone I barely recognized. The light in his eyes, the spark of ambition I had once mistaken for brilliance, had gone out, leaving behind a kind of dull, persistent ache. It was the look of a man living in the long, gray shadow of what might have been, forever defined by the one catastrophic mistake he couldn't undo. I felt a faint, vestigial pang of sadness, not for the man he had become, but for the laughing boy in the university library whose dreams we had once shared. He wasn't a monster. He was simply a man whose moral compass had shattered under the weight of an ambition that was never truly his own. A cautionary tale written in the language of missed potential. There was one piece of news, however, that brought a genuine, quiet smile to my face. In the wake of the scandal, Mr. Chen had retaken direct control of Ascendia Dynamics, initiating a massive restructuring focused on transparency and ethical governance. A press release announcing his new leadership team listed a notable promotion. Ben Carter had been appointed as the new director of internal audits. The young, nervous accountant who had bravely chosen to do the right thing when it was most difficult had been rewarded for his integrity. It was a small, reassuring sign that sometimes, in the wreckage of a fallen empire, something good and deserving can be given the chance to grow. It affirmed that my actions had not only torn down something corrupt, but had also cleared the ground for something better to be built in its place. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday, in a plain manila envelope that felt anticlimactic. The legal language was cold and impersonal, a simple dissolution of a partnership that had, in truth, ended long ago. Tucked inside was a single, handwritten note from Liam on a plain piece of paper. His once bold, confident script was now hesitant, almost shaky. It read, Aria, you were always the stronger partner. I was just too foolish to see it until it was too late. I hope you find the respect you always deserved. I read the words once, then folded the note and placed it in a small wooden box with other relics of my past life. It was not an apology I needed, but an acknowledgement I accepted. It was the final entry in a ledger that was now, finally, and irrevocably closed. My new life did not begin with a lucrative offer to become a director at a major firm. I received several such offers, their compensation packages larger than anything I had ever imagined. But as I read them, I felt a sense of profound attachment. To accept one would have felt like simply rejoining the same system I had just dismantled, a world of compromised ethics and inflated egos, just in a different corner of the casino. I realized that my purpose was not to find a seat at someone else's table. It was to build a new one, from the ground up, on a foundation of unshakable integrity. I took the proceeds from the sale of our apartment and invested it in myself. I leased a small sunlit office space downtown and founded the Veritas Advisory Group. The name was a quiet nod to the anonymous persona that had set me free, a constant reminder of the mission truth. My firm was different by design. I drafted a mission statement that served as my constitution. We would not pursue growth at all costs. We would prioritize long-term stability and ethical practice over short-term profits. My specialty became a unique blend of forensic accounting and preventative corporate ethics consulting. I was not just there to find the fraud after the damage was done. I was there to help companies build systems so robust and transparent that fraud could never take root. I taught my clients that a company's true value wasn't in a soaring stock price, but in its unshakable integrity. It was slow, meticulous, constructive work, and I had never felt more fulfilled. I was no longer a demolition expert, an agent of consequence. I was an architect. One evening, I was on a video call with a prospective new client. He was a young, brilliant CEO of a green energy startup, his face filled with the kind of earnest, world-changing ambition I remembered so well. He had spent an hour outlining his vision, his technology, and his fears about navigating the treacherous world of venture capital. I've been told I need to be aggressive, to bend the rules a little to grow fast enough, he admitted, a worried frown on his face. But that's not the company I want to build. I want to build something that will last, something my kids can be proud of one day. He paused, looking at me seriously through the screen. A friend of a friend who works in the investment community gave me your name. He told me you were the best, he said. If you want to build a house that will last, you hire the best architect you can find. A genuine, unforced smile spread across my face, the kind of smile I hadn't felt in years. It was a smile of peace, of purpose, of profound satisfaction. I looked past the screen, out my office window at the Boston skyline, the lights of the city beginning to sparkle against the deep indigo of the twilight sky. The view was beautiful, a landscape of possibilities. My past was a closed book, its lessons learned, its accounts settled. My future was an unwritten page, a new blueprint waiting to be drawn. Everything felt right, solid, and true. I turned my gaze back to the hopeful face on my screen. Well then, I said, my voice clear and confident, let's get to work.